Have you ever wondered what secrets your neighbors might be hiding? What stories unfold behind closed doors? Sometimes the most ordinary people surprise us in the most extraordinary ways. This is one of those stories, a tale that began with a simple change in routine and led to discoveries that would transform to lives forever. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let me take you on a journey that happened right next door, in a place where the everyday became magical, and where one small change in behavior opened the door to an emotional adventure neither of us saw coming. The quiet street where everything changed. I've called this peaceful suburban neighborhood my home for more than 20 years now. Picture this: tree-lined streets where magnificent oak trees stretch their ancient branches overhead, creating a natural roof that filters sunlight into dancing patterns on the sidewalk below. The houses, mostly built with warm brick and classic siding, stand proudly with their well-maintained gardens that burst into spectacular displays of color every spring and summer. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave from their porches, where children's laughter echoes through the evening air, and where everyone knows each other, even if just by sight. The rhythm of life here moves like a gentle stream, predictable, soothing, and wonderfully comforting. People walk their dogs at the same time each day, mailboxes get checked with clockwork precision, and weekend mornings are filled with the sounds of lawnmowers and friendly conversations over garden fences. The man of mystery next door, me neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had always been what you might call a creature of habit. For as long as I could remember, his daily routine was as reliable as sunrise itself. Every single morning, without fail, at exactly 7:15 a.m., his front door would open with a soft creak. Out he would step, dressed impeccably in his pressed button-down shirt and perfectly creased slacks, looking every bit the professional businessman he was. He'd walk to his car with purposeful steps, his leather briefcase in hand, and if he happened to see someone along the way, he'd offer a polite nod, the kind of acknowledgement that was friendly but didn't invite conversation. Never once did he stop to chat about the weather or comment on how the roses were blooming. He was pleasant enough, but there was an invisible wall around him that seemed to say, "I'm in my own world, and that's how I like it." In the evenings, like clockwork, he'd return home at 6 p.m. sharp. Sometimes he'd pause at his mailbox, sorting through bills and letters, with the same methodical approach he seemed to apply to everything in his life. Then he'd disappear into his house, and that would be the last we'd see of him until the next morning. Over the years, we'd exchanged the usual neighborly pleasantries: "Good morning, nice weather we're having, have a good day," but those conversations never went beyond surface-level politeness. I knew he lived alone, that he drove a dark blue sedan, and that he kept his lawn trimmed to perfection. But beyond those basic observations, Mr. Thompson remained a mystery wrapped in routine. That's exactly why what happened next caught me so completely off guard. The morning that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring, the kind of morning that makes you grateful to be alive. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of blooming lilacs from my garden. I was outside in my front yard, kneeling among my flower beds, carefully tending to the colorful array of petunias and marigolds I'd planted the week before. The soil was still slightly damp from the previous night's gentle rain, and everything seemed to sparkle in the morning light. I heard his front door open, that familiar sound that had marked the beginning of countless mornings. Out of pure habit, I glanced up from my gardening, expecting to see the usual scene: Mr. Thompson in his business attire, heading to his car with that same purposeful stride I'd witnessed hundreds of times before. But what I saw instead nearly made me drop my small gardening trowel in shock. There he was, but everything about him was different. Instead of his usual crisp shirt and formal slacks, he was wearing a comfortable-looking t-shirt and well-worn jeans. In his hands, he carried a red metal toolbox that looked like it had seen better days. But most surprising of all was his demeanor. There was something relaxed about his posture, something almost cheerful in the way he moved. "Good morning, Linda," he called out, his voice carrying a warmth and friendliness that I hadn't heard in all the years we'd been neighbors. I was so stunned that I nearly tumbled backward into my flower bed. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," I managed to reply, trying desperately to hide my amazement. "You're not heading to work today?" He paused in his driveway and turned to face me fully, something he'd never done before. A genuine smile spread across his face, not the polite, distant smile I was used to, but a real one that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. No, not today, he said, and there was something almost jubilant in his voice. I've decided to take some time off from work. Thought I'd finally tackle that leaky kitchen faucet that's been driving me crazy for months. I nodded slowly, still trying to process this dramatic shift in his behavior. Well, that's wonderful, I said, though my voice probably betrayed my confusion. It's important to take breaks now and then, to take care of the little things around the house, he chuckled. Actually chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard from him in all the years I'd known him. You're absolutely right, Linda. I've been so caught up in the daily grind, so focused on work and deadlines and meetings, that I've neglected so many things that are important. It's time to change that. We stood there for a few more minutes, having what was easily the longest conversation we'd ever shared. He told me about his plans to not only fix the faucet but also to tackle some other home improvement projects he'd been putting off. There was an energy about him, a lightness, that I'd never seen before. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. As he walked back toward his house, toolbox in hand and a spring in his step, I couldn't help but stare after him in wonder. What on earth had brought about such a dramatic transformation in this man who had been as predictable as the sunrise for as long as I'd known him? Signs of a new life. Over the next several days, I witnessed more changes that left me increasingly curious and amazed. The man who had barely acknowledged his own backyard was now spending hours out there, his hands deep in the soil, planting vegetables and flowers with the enthusiasm of someone discovering gardening for the first time. I'd see him from my kitchen window, kneeling in what had once been an unused patch of grass, carefully placing tomato seedlings in neat rows. He'd installed a small greenhouse near his back porch and filled it with trays of herbs and flowers in various stages of growth. The transformation of his yard was remarkable, but even more remarkable was the transformation in him. He'd wave enthusiastically whenever he saw me, and sometimes we'd end up having conversations across our shared fence about soil conditions, the best time to plant different vegetables, and which flowers attracted the most butterflies. These weren't the brief, polite exchanges we'd had before. These were real conversations between two people who were genuinely interested in what the other had to say. One afternoon, as I was watering my own garden, I heard him humming softly while he worked. Humming. This was the same man who had moved through his daily routine with the quiet efficiency of someone who rarely allowed himself moments of simple joy. The changes weren't limited to his gardening activities. I noticed that he'd started taking evening walks around the neighborhood, something he'd never done before. He'd stroll leisurely down the tree-lined streets, sometimes stopping to admire a particularly beautiful garden or to pet a friendly dog. Neighbors who had barely exchanged nods with him before were now having brief but pleasant conversations with him about the weather, local events, or their own gardening projects. It was clear that something significant had shifted in his life, but I couldn't figure out what had caused such a dramatic change. An evening of revelation, so particularly beautiful evening, as the sun was beginning to set and the air was filled with the gentle fragrance of jasmine from the vine that climbed my front porch. I was sitting outside enjoying the peaceful end to the day. The sky was painted in breathtaking shades of orange, pink, and purple, and there was a soft breeze that made the leaves rustle gently in the trees. I saw Mr. Thompson, or James, as I was beginning to think of him, walking down the street, carrying a cloth grocery bag. When he spotted me on my porch, his face lit up with that now familiar genuine smile. "Mind if I join you for a few minutes?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty chair beside me. "Not at all," I replied, genuinely pleased at the prospect of his company. "Please, have a seat." He settled into the chair with a contented sigh, and for several minutes we simply sat together in comfortable silence, watching the spectacular sunset unfold before us. The air was warm but not humid, and the sounds of the evening birds settling in for the night, distant laughter from children playing in nearby yards, the gentle hum of air conditioners created a peaceful symphony. "It's absolutely beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly, breaking the companionable silence. "Yes, it really is," I agreed. "This is my favorite time of day. There's something so peaceful about watching the day transition into evening." He nodded thoughtfully, and I could see that he was contemplating something deeper than just the beauty of the sunset. After a moment, he turned to look at me directly, and I was struck by the vulnerability I saw in his eyes. "Linda," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made me pay close attention, "I feel like I've been living my entire life in a bubble. Work, routine, responsibilities. Deadlines. I got so caught up in all of that I forgot to actually live. I forgot to take time to notice sunsets like this one, to appreciate the simple pleasures that make life worth living. I was surprised by his openness, by the raw honesty in his voice. What made you come to that realization? I asked gently, sensing that there was more to his story. He was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if he might not answer. But then he took a deep breath and said, "A few weeks ago, I had what my doctor called a health scare. It turned out to be nothing serious, just some chest pains that were caused by stress and too much caffeine, but for a few terrifying hours, I thought I might be having a heart attack." My heart went out to him. "Oh, James, I'm so sorry you went through that. That must have been frightening." "It was," he admitted. "But you know what scared me even more than the possibility of dying? It was the realization that if something had happened to me, I would have died without ever really having lived. I mean, really lived. I'd been going through the motions for so long, wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat, that I'd forgotten there was supposed to be joy in life." He paused, looking out at the deepening colors of the sunset. Sitting in that hospital waiting room, waiting for test results, I started thinking about all the things I'd been putting off, all the experiences I'd been too busy to have, all the connections I'd been too focused on work to make. I realized I didn't want to look back on my life and regret not taking time to enjoy the simple things like talking to neighbors, or growing a garden, or just sitting on a porch watching the sunset. I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I'm so glad you're okay, and I think it's incredibly brave of you to make such significant changes in your life. It can't be easy to step away from routines you've had for so long." He smiled, and while there was still a hint of sadness in his eyes, there was also something else: hope, determination, and a kind of quiet joy. "Thank you, Linda. You're right. It's not easy. Some days I feel a little lost, like I'm learning how to be a person all over again. But it's also been incredibly rewarding. I'm discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed." We continued talking as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. He told me about the small changes he was making in his daily life, taking time to cook real meals instead of just heating up frozen dinners, reading books for pleasure instead of just work-related materials, listening to music while he worked in his garden. These might seem like small things, but I could see how meaningful they were to him. A moment of self-reflection. That conversation stayed with me long after James had said goodnight and returned to his house. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the gentle sounds of the neighborhood settling into sleep, I found myself thinking not just about his transformation, but about my own life. At T56, I realized I had fallen into my own set of routines that, while comfortable, had perhaps become too predictable. When was the last time I had done something spontaneous? When had I last pushed myself out of my comfort zone or tried something new? I thought about all the things I'd been meaning to do but had put off: learning to paint, taking that photography class at the community center, visiting the museums in the city that I'd been saying I'd get to someday. James's courage in recognizing that he needed to make changes, and his willingness to actually make them, was inspiring. It made me wonder if maybe it was time for me to examine my own life and see where I might be able to inject some new energy, some fresh experiences. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would bring James and me closer together as friends, and that would teach both of us valuable lessons about the importance of human connection, of living fully in each moment, and of being open to the unexpected gifts that life can offer when we're brave enough to step outside our comfort zones. The beginning of something beautiful. Days that followed our heart-to-heart conversation on the porch were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation and possibility. James, I had started thinking of him by his first name, naturally now continued to embrace his new lifestyle with enthusiasm. He spent his mornings working in his garden, his afternoons reading on his back porch, and his evenings taking leisurely walks around the neighborhood. I found myself looking forward to our chance encounters, whether it was brief conversations over the fence while we both tended our gardens, or longer chats when we happened to be checking our mail at the same time. There was something refreshing about his transformation, something that made me feel more alive and aware of the beauty in everyday moments. One Saturday morning, I was in my backyard dealing with the rose bushes that had grown wild and unruly over the summer months. The morning air was perfectly warm, the kind of warmth that feels like a gentle embrace rather than an oppressive weight. I had my pruning shears in hand and was carefully cutting back the overgrown branches when I heard the familiar sound of James's back door opening. "Good morning, Linda," he called out cheerfully as he appeared at the fence that separated our yards. His voice carried that same contagious lightness that had become his trademark over the past few weeks. "Good morning, James," I replied, setting down my pruning shears and wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "How's your garden coming along today?" He leaned against the fence with a smile that was both proud and slightly sheepish. "It's definitely a work in progress," he said with a laugh. "I've got tomatoes that are starting to come in, and my zinnias are beginning to bloom beautifully. But I have to admit, I could use some expert advice if you have a moment to spare." The word expert made me chuckle. I don't know about expert, but I'm happy to help however I can. "What's troubling you?" He gestured toward a section of his yard near his back porch. "I'm trying to grow some herbs: basil, thyme, rosemary, parsley, but they're just not thriving the way I hoped they would." I thought I was doing everything right, following all the instructions I found online, but he shrugged with that endearing mixture of frustration and humor that I was learning was typical of his approach to new challenges. "Herbs can be surprisingly tricky," I said, walking over to the fence. "They often need very specific conditions: just the right amount of sunlight, proper drainage, the right type of soil. Let me take a look and see if I can figure out what might be going wrong." He opened the gate that connected our yards, a gate I hadn't walked through in years, and I stepped into his garden for the first time since he'd begun his transformation. What I saw took my breath away. His backyard had been completely transformed from the utilitarian, barely maintained space it had been just a few weeks earlier. Now it was a labor of love, with carefully planned rows of vegetables, colorful flowers interspersed throughout, and even a small seating area with a wooden bench positioned to take advantage of the morning sun. The air was filled with the rich scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers, and I felt an immediate sense of peace and contentment wash over me. This was clearly a space that was being tended with care and attention, a place where someone was investing not just time and effort, but genuine love. "James, this is absolutely wonderful," I said, genuinely amazed by what he had accomplished. "You've created something really special here." His face lit up with pride and pleasure. "Thank you, Linda. It's been incredibly rewarding to work on. Every morning when I come out here, I discover something new: a plant that's grown overnight, a flower that's just opened, a tomato that's ready to be picked. It's like having a daily dose of small miracles." We knelt together by the herb patch, and I showed him how to test the soil moisture with his finger, explained the importance of proper spacing to allow for air circulation, and demonstrated how to pinch back certain herbs to encourage bushier growth. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes in a small notebook he pulled from his pocket. There was something deeply touching about his earnestness, the way he approached this new hobby with such genuine enthusiasm and determination to learn. It reminded me of a child discovering something wonderful for the first time, and I found his passion infectious. "You're really getting the hang of this," I said as I watched him carefully replant a basil seedling, taking care to give it the proper spacing and depth. "You're a natural gardener." He laughed softly, his hands still covered with rich, dark soil. "I don't know about that, but I'm definitely enjoying it more than I ever expected to. There's something incredibly therapeutic about working with your hands like this, about nurturing something and watching it grow. It helps clear my mind and puts everything else into perspective." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Gardening has always been my escape too. There's something about the cycle of planting and growing and harvesting that connects you to something larger than yourself. It's meditative, almost spiritual. We spent the rest of the morning working side by side in his garden, talking and laughing as we tended to his plants. The conversation flowed easily and naturally, covering everything from his experiments with cooking using fresh herbs from his garden. He was particularly excited about making homemade pesto, to childhood memories of spending summers on his grandparents' farm in Iowa. I learned so much about him that morning: that he had been married for 25 years before losing his wife to cancer nearly a decade ago, that his intense focus on work had been his way of coping with that devastating loss, and that he was now ready to honor her memory by rediscovering the joy and beauty in life that she had always encouraged him to appreciate. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the morning grew warmer, we took a break, sitting on his back porch with tall glasses of ice-cold lemonade. The shade from the awning provided welcome relief from the heat, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of lavender from a planter nearby. "Linda," he said, after a few moments of comfortable silence, "I want you to know how much I appreciate your kindness, your willingness to share your knowledge and experience with me. Having a friend like you makes all the difference in the world." The word friend warmed my heart in a way I hadn't expected. It had been a long time since I'd made a new friend, especially one who lived right next door. "It's truly my pleasure, James. Really. It's wonderful to have someone to share this passion with, someone who understands the joy that comes from nurturing, growing things." He looked at me then, his eyes soft and filled with gratitude, and I could see that this new friendship meant as much to him as it was beginning to mean to me. In that moment, I realized that his transformation had sparked something in me as well. A renewed appreciation for connection, for shared experiences, for the simple pleasure of spending time with someone who truly understood the value of life's quieter moments. This was indeed just the beginning of something beautiful. A friendship that would continue to grow and flourish, just like the gardens we both tended with such care and love. Searching, I feel the same way. There was a moment, just a fleeting moment, where the air between us seemed to shift, charged with something unspoken, but then he smiled, breaking the tension, and stood up. "How about I make us some lunch? I've got fresh tomatoes and mozzarella. Maybe we can make a caprese." "That sounds wonderful," I said, following him inside. His kitchen was cozy, with warm wooden cabinets and a large window that let in plenty of light. As he sliced tomatoes and tore basil leaves, I sat theatable, feeling a sense of ease that I hadn't felt in a long time. We ate lunch together, the flavors fresh and vibrant, conversation light but meaningful. Afterward, as I helped him wash the dishes, he said, "You know, Linda, I've been thinking life is too short to spend it alone. I'm grateful for days like this, for moments of connection." I turned to look at him, my hands still wet from the dishwater. "I am too, James. I really am," Hasmold. And in that smile I saw a reflection of my own feelings, gratitude, hope, and the quiet joy of discovering something new. As I walked back to my house later that afternoon, I felt a sense of lightness, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. The day had been simple, but I had also been profound. It was a reminder that life's most meaningful moments often come from smallest gestures, the quiet connections that weave the fabric of our lives. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a deeper bond, one that will challenge us, comfort us, and ultimately change us in ways we never expected. The weeks that followed our gardening day were filled with a newfound rhythm. James and I began spending more time together, not out of obligation, but out of a shared desire for compens. We'd meet in the mornings for coffee on his porch, the steam from our mugs curling into the cool air as we talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes we'd work in our garden side by side, the silence between us comfortable and reassuring. There times we'd take walks around the neighborhood, admiring the changing colors of the leaves as autumn began to paint the world in shades of gold and crimson. It was during one of these walks that the first crack appeared in the calm surface of our growing friendship. Sky was overcast, the air heavy with promise of rain, but we decided to go anyway, lured by the Christmas of the season. As we strolled down the trail in Ed Street, James grew unusually quiet, his shins shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. "Everything okay?" I asked, glancing at him. He hesitated, then sighed. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something, Linda. It's just hard to put into words." I felt a flicker of concern but kept my voice steady. "You can tell me anything, James. You know that." He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. "It's about my health. The scare I mentioned before, it wasn't as minor as a mod it sound. The doctors found something, a condition that's going toward resurgery. It's not life-threatening." Beauty's complicated. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm. "James, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked down, his voice soft. "He didn't want to burden you, and I guess he was afraid of how it might change things between us." I shook my head, me heart aching for him. "You're not a burden, James, not to me. We're friends, and friends are there for each other no matter what." He met my gaze then, and I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear he'd been carrying alone. "Thank you, Linda. That means more than you know." We stood there for a moment, the world around us fading away, until the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time we made it back to our houses, we were both soaked, but the heaviness in the air had lifted, replaced by a sense of celerity. In the days that followed, James's health became a shared concern. He accompanied him to doctors' appointments, taking notes and asking questions when seemed too overwhelmed to speak. We searched his condition together, sitting at his kitchen table with stacks of medical pamphlets and cups of tea. It was during one of these sessions that he opened up about his late wife Margaret and how her illness had taken a toll on him. I felt so helpless, he admitted, his voice trembling. I didn't want to go through that again, didn't want to put someone else through it. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. James, you're not alone this time, and you are not helpless. We'll face this together, one step at a time. He squeezed me hand, his eyes glistening with unhid tears. I don't know what I did to deserve you, Linda. I smiled, though my own eyes were damp. You were just you, and that's more than enough. The surgery was scheduled for the following month, and as the date approached, the tension between us grew. But so did our bond. We spent our days preparing, both practically and emotionally. I helped him organize his house, stocking the freezer with meals and setting up a comfortable recovery pace in his living room. In the evenings, sit by the fireplace talking about our hopes and fears, our past and future. So night as the fire crackled and cast flickering shadows on the walls, James turned to me and said, Linda, I need you to know something. If things don't go as planned, if something happens, interrupted him, my voice for him. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine, but no matter what, I'll be here. You're no getting rid of me that easily. He chuckled, but there was a seriousness in his eye. Seemed glad to hear it, because you've become very important to me. The word sung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt my breath catch, my heart pounding in my chest. You're important to me too, James, more than you realize. We sat there in silence, the fire casting a warm glow over us, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing against walls we built around our hearts. It was a moment of raw honesty, a glimpse into the depth of what we'd come to me into each other. The night before his surgery, I stayed late helping him pack his bag and going over the last minute details. As I was about to leave, he stopped me at the door, his hand on my arm. Linda, he said, his voice soft but steady, thank you for everything, for being here, for being you. I turned to face him, my eyes searching his. You don't have to thank me, James. This is what friends do, and maybe more. He smiled, a slow, tender smile that made my heart ache. Maybe more. He echoed. Eddie leaned in, pressing a kiss to his cheek, and for a moment we stood there, the space between us charged with unspoken promises. Then I stepped back, squeezing his hand. I'll see you tomorrow. You've got this. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. I've got this. As I walked home under the starry sky, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, hope, and a deep, abiding love that had quietly taken root in my heart. The storm was coming, but I knew'd weather it together. The morning of James' surgery dawned, gray and heavy, second of day that feels like the world is holding its breath. I woke early, missed a mac and knots, and made my way to his house. He was already up, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks, his bag packed and ready by the door. He looked calm, but I could see the tension in the way he held his shoulders, the way his hands fidgeted with the strap of his bag. Ready? I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He nodded, giving me a small smile. As ready as I'll ever be. Drove to the hospital in silence, the radio playing softly in the background. The streets were quiet, the world still waking up, and I found myself memorizing the details of the morning. The way the light filtered through the clouds, the sound of tires on wet pavement, the faint scent of James' cologne. It felt like a moment suspended in time, fragile and fleeting. At the hospital, the nurses were kind and efficient, guiding James through pre-op procedures with practiced ease. Stayed by his side, holding his hand when they inserted the cracking Jakesto light in the mood. But as the time for surgery approached, the reality of the situation settled over us like a heavy blanket. Linda, James said, his voice sweet but steady, if I don't make it through this. I shook my head, cutting him off. Boom, you're going to be fine, but just in case, I need you to know something. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. You've become so important, Tom. James, these past few months, they've meant everything. I don't know what I'd do without you. He looked at me, his eyes soft but intense. You've changed my life, Linda. You've shown me what it means to live again. No matter what happens, I'll always be grateful for that. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away, determined to stay strong for him. You're going to come out of this, and we're going to have so many more moments together. I promise. He squeezed my hand, his grip firm. I'll hold you to faith. Nurses came then, wheeling him away, and I stood there watching until he disappeared through the double doors. The waiting room was quiet, the air thick with anticipation, and I sank into a chair, clutching the small cross pendant he wore around my neck. I prayed not just for James, but for the strength to face whatever came next. The hours dragged by, a minute feeling like an eternity. Tried to distract myself with a book, but the words blurred on the page, miming constantly drifting back to James. I thought About the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laughter, the way he made me feel seen and valued in a way I hadn't in years. I thought about the life we'd started to build together, the quiet moments and theshered dreams, and I realized just how much he'd come to mean to me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgeon emerged as fast and readable. I stood up, my heart in my throat, and he gave me a small smile. The surgery went well, he said. James is in recovery now. He's going to be just fine. Relief washed over me, so intense that my knees nearly buckled. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Thank you so much. I was allowed to see him a short while later, and though he was groggy from the anesthesia, his eyes lit up when he saw me. Hey, he said, hispous but warm. Hey, I replied, taking his hand. You did it. He smiled weakly. We did it. The days that followed were a blur of hospital routines and quiet months of connection. I stayed by James' side, helping him through the pain and discomfort, reminding him to take his medication and keeping his spirits up with stories and laughter. Slowly but surely he began to recover, his strength returning day by day. One evening, as Thiessen sat outside his hospital window casting a warm golden glow over the room, James turned to me and said, Linda, I've been thinking. Life is too short to waste time. I don't want to wait anymore. I looked at him, my heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? He reached for my hand, his grip firm despite his weakness. I mean, I love you, Linda. I've loved you for a while now, and I don't want to hide it anymore. I want to spend whatever time I have left with you, building a life together. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. I'd love you too, James Summick. He smiled, his eyes shining with emotion. Then let's do this. Let's make the most of every moment we have. I leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. And in that moment everything felt right. The storm had passed, and in its wake we'd found something beautiful. A love born out of friendship, strengthened by adversity, and rooted in mutual respect and understanding.